I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for coming back from lunch. We are all born with a pattern of taking action. We're born with it. It does not change over time. It does not identify your weakness. It does not suggest that something is wrong that needs to be changed. Additionally, it does not tell you what you can or cannot do. And finally, it does not tell you who in life is going to be more successful than another. In 1987, Kathy Kolbe developed what's called the Kolbe A Index. The Kolbe A Index measures your instincts. Her dad developed the Wonderlic IQ test, or mental ability test, as he called it. She would help him with all the paperwork, developing this cognitive assessment. And one day when she was in school learning about Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, she said, "You know what, Dad? There are 3 parts of the mind. You're working with one of them. I've noticed that there are other ways people are successful besides taking tests and being an extrovert or an introvert. I want to study that." Kathy Kolbe's dyslexic. Her dad said, "Go for it. Study away." 20 years later, she developed a way to test the instincts, which are a subconscious force, until they're not. And they're not when they're ignited. When you put yourself into a state of having to decide how to solve a problem, you ignite your instincts, and out pops a 4-digit number we are going to call a pattern. That pattern does not change, and it is perfect inside every one of you. In a couple stories from now, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to ask some questions, and then I'm going to wrap up with a final story. But I wanted to give you that heads up. I discovered my pattern when I was 18. And for the first time in my life, I had someone sit across the table from me and tell me that your last minute is okay. You can be last minute and you can be random. You don't have to do things in order. What? Because I've just learned for the last 10 years that that's wrong, not to do things in order. Now you're telling me that that's in me and it can't change over time? I was told I didn't need as much detail as my parents to solve a problem, and that was okay. The other thing I was told is I didn't need to finish everything I started. Can you tell my teachers that? All of them? That's how this information has affected my life. I'm going to share with you 3 examples, real-life examples of how it's affected others. 2 items need to be present before someone decides to find this out. The first item they need to have is that they don't have all the answers. Second item that needs to be present is that they see something amazing in someone else that's different than themselves. And instead of trying to make it different or fix it, they want to understand it. Have you ever been in a classroom or in a home and people argue and they kind of bicker and they're at each other, whether it's a husband and wife or whether it's kids and parents or teachers and students or students and students? What if you had proof out in front of you and you were holding it of how every single person took action? Would that eliminate the arguing? Would you believe it? Would you trust it? Or would you at least test it? This is where Landon and his mother were when they decided to find out their pattern that predicts their path. They were constantly bickering and fighting. She said, Landon, you've got to look this up. You've got to have 3 sources to cite this paper. You need more details. You need to check your grammar. He's like, no, Mom, I don't do it that way. No, that's not myself. She's like, if you want to pass school, this is what needs to happen. Landon was a baseball player. So when he was playing baseball, he started second-guessing himself on the field. Can you pull up Landon's pattern, Mike? Landon realized that his natural gift on the field wasn't what he was focusing on. He was having a hard time in judging himself because Landon has a need to keep things pretty stable in his life. Not a lot of surprises. So on the field, when he was told to try this and experiment with that and do that, it wasn't natural for him. So his confidence went down. The last thing the family was concerned about is if Landon would graduate at all. Could he really make it in the world? When they saw the pattern, when they took and saw what was absolutely perfect about how Landon works, this is what came up. And the mom instantly said, oh my goodness, that's why I need the details. I need those, but Landon does not need the details to make his absolute best decision. And when Landon held his pattern that predicts his path out in front of him, he said, oh my gosh, I'm so good at baseball speed and trajectory and how fast people are going and if they're going to make it around and in what time. He leaned into how he works when free to be himself. What do you think happened? His confidence went up on the field. He's like, I can do this. His coach gave him accolades and his teammates were cheering him on because he leaned in instead of trying to make it different. This is innate. It's not going anywhere. So why would you try and bang your head against the wall and make it any different? They were super concerned about Landon graduating. This is huge. His parents decided, you can do it. They gave him the baton. They saw his pattern that predicts his path. They're like, go ahead, Landon. I know you can do this. I know you've got this. Landon's like, oh man, I don't know if I do. This is really hard. He almost flunked out. Landon called his teachers to get extra homework. Landon got his GPA up. And Landon trusted his pattern that predicts his path. Guess what Landon is doing today? He is enrolled in a sports medicine track for next year. He graduated. Yes! Yes, he did. I went up to Sydney. I said, Sydney, what are you so excited about? What do you love in life? Tell me now. Her answer, it was exciting, like watching paint dry or eating grass. And it was like steadfastness, I would say, of a life sentence in prison. This is what the teenager says. I don't know. Do I need to know? Do I need to know now? That Sunday, Sydney was playing football. She went out for a pass. She was about to catch the pass. And as she turned to run it into the end zone, she snapped her ACL and she was out. She was out. She was out for months. While she was out rehabbing her knee, she was thinking of all the people that didn't have limbs. She was thankful that she had the use of her limbs. She loved science already. Now she was starting to love body mechanics. As she was rehabbing and thinking about going back to school, she was getting depressed. because she was on crutches. Someone had to carry her books. She was like, how can I do this? I really don't want to go back to school. Her parents thought it would be a good idea to know her pattern that predicts her path. Sydney has a natural need for details, which is the red. She has a natural need for systems and organization. So what that means is her grades were strong naturally, but the pattern for her path was weak. So when she discovered her pattern and she was looking at it and she's like, oh, okay, yep, that's why school's easy. And I said, Sydney, you might want to tell your friends not to throw you a surprise party. And when people change things at the last minute, does that stress you out? She said, absolutely. It does stress me out. I need to keep things even keel, and I don't want a lot of surprises. And lastly, Sydney has a need to get her hands on the environment. She has a need to touch things and create things with her hands. So here we have a girl at the beginning of the conversation who didn't know what she wanted, typical teenager. Her injury created her motivation to learn about body mechanics with her bend in science. Now that she knows her pattern that predicts her path, what do you think Sydney's doing today? She's making prosthetic limbs because she knew her pattern that predicted her path. Before I tell you the last story, I've got a few minutes for some questions if anyone has any. If you don't, that's okay. Okay? I'm done. I don't want to go to school anymore. I hate school. I feel ridiculous every time I go. I have to sit there for 7 hours. I can't touch anything. I'm done and I hate it and I'm not going back. This is what Tyler said when he came home from the 3rd grade. You know what was the most difficult thing that his parents said about that whole encounter? The light went out of his eyes. The light for learning went out of his eyes. He was done. And this wasn't today. This had been going on for years. Crying, frustrated, not wanting to read and do story time at night. His parents thought, I want to understand my child. I want to understand how he works. I want to discover his pattern. So they did. When they saw Tyler's pattern, they weren't surprised, but it's pretty much the exact opposite of Sydney's pattern. Tyler is a natural physical risk taker. How in the world is he going to be successful in school with a physical risk taker, an innate ability that you cannot change over time? This is his pattern that predicts his path that doesn't change. How is he going to be successful when he has very little need for detail, very little need for a plan? He needs to be physically active and take risks. As the 3 of them, the parents and the child, were brainstorming, they decided to take their plight into the school. And they went into the teacher. The 4 of them were talking, showing him the pattern. Tyler said, I want to be the go-to guy. I want to be that kid. Teacher's like, what does that mean? What's the go-to guy? I want to be the kid that fixes things. I want to be the kid that changes the light bulbs, turns the clocks back, fixes the desks when they're broken. Can I do that, please? I can get up and move around, and then I can sit there when I have to sit there, because I don't really want to sit there in the first place. Teacher kind of looked at him like, could have gone either way, right? Yes. Yes, you can, Tyler. Yes, you can be the fix-it guy. Yes, you can. And so he did. He was the fix-it guy. couple years later, he came home from school, and his parents noticed he wasn't bringing any homework sheets home. Tyler knows his pattern that predicts his path. So he is deciding for himself with the consequences. He said, I know, I took the 10% ding. Parents are like, 10% ding on what? Well, when they keep giving me these homework sheets, Mom, I can't play. So I asked the teacher, how much is it going to cost me if I don't do the homework? And she said 10%. I'll take it. And the light came back into his eyes. Would that be worth it to you to take the 10% ding to get the light back into the eyes? A few years later, his parents kept me apprised of Tyler's gifts. And he wanted to enter a school to build and create. He was a construction kid. He had to get good grades to get into this school. He had to write papers. He needed to read paragraphs. And he figured out that when he uses all his gifts, he really sleeps well. But when he wakes up in the morning, he is best. So he decided to do his hardest work right when he wakes up. Why not? I'm going to do the toughest thing first because I have all my energy. To write papers, he uses his gaming headset to talk text and write the papers. The last hack that he does is when he has long paragraphs to read, he highlights them and puts them into Google Translate, and Google Translate reads it back to him. His retention is off the charts. Tyler's pattern predicts his path. Guess what Tyler is doing today? He is starting a welding school in 2 weeks, and his grades got up, so he'll be on a construction track in the school of his choice in the fall. Way to go, T-Bug. Way to go, Tyler. So Landon, Sydney, and Tyler, unengaged, disinterested, until they saw their pattern that predicts their path, that isn't going anywhere. It is solid, not changing over time. Each of them has a pattern, just like each of you have a pattern. Your pattern predicts your power to grow, your power to learn, and your power to succeed. Your power to grow comes from your bright eyes to be curious and learning. And your power to succeed is you knowing what you will and will not do naturally. Not what you like, what you will and will not do naturally. And lastly, you will be most successful when you know and follow your perfect pattern for taking action. Thank you.